everyone. It's 10 o'clock on the West Coast of the US and 1 o'clock on the East Coast, and we're going to go ahead and start on time. My name is Terry Pugh, and I am the Director of Civic Engagement for the Foundation for Climate Restoration, and I'm so excited to be here with you today. Welcome to our Foundation for Climate Restoration monthly conference call for August of 2022. The purpose of this call is to inspire you and forward our work to create the political will to restore the climate. I believe we have a few guests on the call who might be new to us and the Foundation's work. So, welcome. Here's what's going to happen on today's call. In a moment, I will introduce our guest speaker, Brandon McMurtry of Senator Chris Coons' office, to talk about the Federal Carbon Dioxide Removal Leadership Act, or S4280. Brandon McMurtry will speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have 15 minutes for questions. So be thinking of questions you'd like to ask. Then we'll hear a Grassroots Victory from Carol England about setting up the book signing event the North Bay chapter had in Petaluma. And after that, our training section will focus on writing letters with our friends to urge members of Congress and senators to co-sponsor the Federal Carbon Dioxide Removal Leadership Act, or FCDRLA. As of August 5th, we still only have the original co-sponsors on S4280 in the Senate. That's Chris Coons of Delaware and Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. We are now up to 2 additional co-sponsors on HR 7434 in the House, which then added to the original 2 sponsors brings us up to 4 total. Our training is meant to help increase those numbers of sponsors on both of those bills. Our voices are really needed to bring this issue to our elected officials powerfully. The more voices the members of Congress hear from, the better. So thank you for inviting your friends who are looking for a way to make a difference on our August 6th conference call with this letter writing party immediately afterwards. As you know, we urge all chapters to connect with your chapter immediately after every monthly conference call or write letters and plan other actions. If you do not have a chapter yet, no worries. We will connect you with a team to write with following this meeting. Here are the chapters that have requested a post-call breakout room. The Pacific Northwest, which I don't know if even that one will happen, and the North Bay chapter in California. If your chapter did not request a breakout room to use after the call and you'd like one, please write breakout in the chat and the name of your chapter, and we'll set your chapter up with the post-call breakout room. Actually, Maria will. Again, if your chapter did not request a breakout room to use after the call and you'd like one, please write breakout in the chat and the name of the chapter, and we'll set your chapter up with the post-call breakout room. If you know anyone who's looking for a way to make a difference, urge them to attend also our introductory call. Normally happens the second Tuesday of every month. This month, the intro call will be Tuesday, August 9th at 7 p.m. Eastern or 4 p.m. Pacific. That should be in the chat for registration. Please save it. Talk with your friends about our work and share the registration link with your friends who want to make a difference on the climate. Brandon McMurtry might be able to do our 1-hour Q&A session about S4280 next Wednesday, but he can't be sure because he's involved in the negotiations taking place right now over the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. So we will wait and see if he can make it on Wednesday. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker. Brandon McMurtry is a legislative fellow on U.S. Senator Chris Coons' Energy and Environmental Policy team, covering a range of climate and decarbonization-related topics. Brandon earned his PhD in chemistry at Columbia University, studying the synthesis of colloidal semiconductor nanocrystals for solid-state lighting applications. Prior to graduate school, he received a BS in chemistry from the University of Hawaii at Manoa in Honolulu, Hawaii, where he was born and raised. Brandon will speak about S4280, or the Federal Carbon Dioxide Removal Act. Brandon, let me give you an idea of the people you're talking with before you start. As you may know, our volunteers have been focused on getting the word out about the importance of restoring the climate. Our Foundation for Climate Restoration chapter in Maine decided to put together an event for our founder to showcase his book about climate restoration. They arranged to have him speak at an influential annual garden party at Peter Garrett's house. Thank you for being here, Peter. That focuses on climate change, with 70 influential dignitaries scheduled to attend. Staffers for both senators, Susan Collins and Angus King, have been invited. After Peter Dugas, the Maine State Coordinator of Citizens Climate Lobby, provides an update on federal climate legislation, they will introduce Peter Fiekowsky and his co-author, Carol Douglas, who will both have an opportunity to speak and take questions.
You're muted, Terry.
You hit mute.
You got muted, Terry.
Where did I stop at? Was I talking about Peter Garrett?
Yes.
Okay.
You got a bit beyond that. Go on.
Okay. Well, it's amazing to say all the accomplishments that Maine has managed to pull together so darn quickly. So Peter Fiekowsky, plus David Batuski and Peter Garrett of Maine, will meet several climate leaders together at the University of Maine. Also, Peter is expected to meet with the Maine State climatologist, Dr. Sean Burkle, and leading author, teacher, and advisor to Governor Mills, Ivan Fernandez, among several others. Maine also arranged to have Peter Fiekowsky speak to academics from the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, as well as a startup company that sequesters carbon and kelp. We're excited to bring this high level of commitment and passion to the federal level to work on supporting Senator Coons' FCDRLA, or S4280. Everyone should remember to be thinking of questions to ask after Brandon's brief opening remarks. We are so honored to have you with us, Brandon. Please begin.
Hi, everyone. Huge thanks, first of all, Terry, for having me today. Really an honor to speaking with you all. Obviously, you all are kind of a group of deeply passionate kind of citizens in this space, and I think that really are truly the driving force to ensuring that we make sure that kind of big climate legislation gets done. So thank you for all the work that you all do. We are, I think, working for someone who is obviously quite passionate about climate. We find the work that you all do to be kind of endlessly important, and certainly drives us to do the important work on climate too. So really, really excited to be here, really excited to speak with you all. As Terry mentioned, I'm a fellow on Senator Chris Coons' Energy and Environment team. My background is actually in chemistry. Got my PhD from Columbia University after being born and raised in Honolulu, Hawaii. I am here on the Hill through what we call a AAAS fellowship. So AAAS is the organization that publishes Science Magazine. In addition to that, they have this excellent program where they bring kind of professional scientists, engineers, and kind of people throughout the STEM space to the Hill, as well as different federal agencies, to ensure that there's kind of a pipeline of scientific knowledge going into the government and the policymaking process. And it's certainly been a program that I've gotten a lot out of, and hopefully one that I think that most of the offices that host fellows get a lot out of too. In this past year, I've been lucky enough to work on a number of topics in the kind of broader decarbonization space, including on the utilization of kind of low carbon hydrogen, various different carbon management topics, as well as specifically in the kind of DAC and carbon dioxide removal space. And all of this really ties very nicely to the bill that I'm going to be talking about today, which is my boss's Federal Carbon Dioxide Removal Leadership Act, which my boss recently introduced with Senator Whitehouse. It is a very similar version to the bill that was introduced in the House by Representatives Tonkos and Peters. And certainly we got most of the language and most of the motivation for this bill from our House partners, and are kind of endlessly grateful for all the kind of stakeholder outreach and kind of laying the groundwork for this bill that they've done on that side. So I know that you all had Elisa Vandenbush come in. She's one of my good friends and also a fellow through AAAS. And she really did a lot of the heavy lifting in Representative Tonko's office to really get this bill off the ground. So certainly want to give credit where credit is due there. I'm going to give a little bit of background. I realize that some of this is probably a little bit repetitive for a group like this, but bear with me a little bit. So I think that, as I think you all appreciate, really every part of the world is experiencing climate change in some way, shape, or form. And really this spans from the severe droughts that people in the West Coast are experiencing to sea level rise that is really kind of very close or closely followed issue in my office and to my boss, in part because Delaware is the lowest lying state in the country. I come from an island state in Hawaii in which sea level rise is clearly kind of very front of mind in the larger discussion of the climate crisis. And really many of these issues while important on a global scale, impact individuals and communities on a local scale. And I think that that's really part of the message that we in the federal government have to do a better job of trying to translate to kind of individual communities. This idea that while climate change is this big abstract concept, the impacts of it are going to be felt in each and every community that is represented in the larger federal government. So I think that obviously for a group of you all, a group of community activists, I think that this is clearly something that you all understand and something that clearly is kind of pressing in your minds. And I think it's something that we in the federal government are trying to translate to the larger public, this idea that climate change really is going to be a central one, not just globally, but locally also. So really reversing the impacts of climate change will kind of first and foremost involve kind of reducing emissions. And this is the kind of mitigation space that we've talked about a lot, kind of in the larger climate space thus far, and really is kind of the central focus of much of the work that's been done in the climate space thus far. Mitigation obviously is kind of one of the central pillars to the Inflation Reduction Act, which for those of you who follow Politico and watch C-SPAN regularly will know is being, the procedural steps are starting today with kind of larger votes in the package, probably beginning sometime this evening or early tomorrow morning. And we, obviously working personally in an office that cares about climate change, are very excited about many of these kind of critical investments that are being made in this bill, kind of central of which is the around $300 billion dedicated to clean energy tax credits. They'll be devoted to solar, wind, as well as kind of a range of clean energy technologies will be essential to decarbonizing both the power sector, but as well as the kind of sectors that branch off from the larger power sector. So this is obviously kind of one of the really most critical and largest climate investments that have ever been made by the United States. And I think one that the climate focused offices are very, very happy about. And I think that we're excited about the direction that's going. But I think as many climate scientists, many reports have shown and will tell you, really these mitigation tactics, while crucially important to fighting the climate crisis, will not be enough to hitting many of our net zero goals by 2050. And this is in part because of the legacy emissions that we've already put into the environment will lead us into a future in which the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal is ambitious, if not impossible, honestly. So in reality, scientists have pointed to the need for basically technologies that remove carbon dioxide as essential to achieving these ambitious climate goals that we have. And these technologies include things like direct air capture, for example, which is probably the most popularized, most mature of the larger carbon dioxide removal technologies that are currently in the market. And just to give us a sense of scale here, I think most scientists estimate that by 2050, we're going to be needing to remove on the order of billions of tons of carbon dioxide per year in order to really achieve the net zero goals that we have by 2050. So on the bright side of this, obviously these are challenges that are monumental in scale. We're currently capturing about on the order of tens of thousands of tons of CO2 per year. So we're about 5 or 6 orders of magnitude off at the moment. But the kind of bright side here is that American companies really have been at the forefront of carbon capture technology for many, many years now. And both in a technological sense and in an environmental sense, the US is poised to be a leader in carbon dioxide removal and carbon dioxide storage. We have more saline reservoirs than almost any kind of region in the world. And we really are setting ourselves up, or the kind of natural resources that we are currently provided and the technological advantages that we have really sets us up to be a leader in the world in the larger carbon dioxide removal space. And this is why we're obviously very heartened by many of the investments made in the infrastructure bill, including kind of many billions of dollars being put towards direct air capture hubs, which will really build out much of the necessary infrastructure needed for direct air capture to grow and be fostered within this country. The difficult part, however, is there really is, in spite of the infrastructure being put in place, there's a real stable market for carbon dioxide removal. So as you can imagine, kind of with most products, the natural way that you produce something, you'll have an inevitable buyer, and that the thing that you're producing will have some value to it. But obviously captured carbon dioxide really kind of bucks that trend, in part because the end product really is a removal. It's a basically service that you're providing to kind of either a company, a government, or society at large. And so one of the really kind of challenging pieces of the kind of larger carbon dioxide removal space is ensuring that we have a market in place to allow these kind of carbon dioxide removal companies to have a stable business model to continue to function long term. And this is difficult because carbon dioxide removal right now is quite expensive, and it's quite difficult to ensure that we have direct air capture plants that have a stable source of financing long term. So this really was the kind of part of the motivation behind the Federal Carbon Dioxide Removal Leadership Act. And the general model that we're working with here is essentially a procurement program in which the federal government would enter into contracts with different direct air capture companies or other CDR companies to buy captured and stored CO2. And here we're going to be scaling from on the order of around 1 million tons per year up to around 10 million tons per year over the next decade. Here we're designing the program such that, acknowledging the prices are high now, we set the maximum amount that we can spend per ton of CO2 at a high level early in the program at around $500 per ton. That will slowly ramp down to about $100 per ton by 2030, which is kind of aligning with Biden's goals in the carbon dioxide removal space. So here, the idea behind this is that we can use the kind of procurement power of the federal government to begin laying the groundwork for a market for carbon dioxide removal, really taking some of that burden off of many of the voluntary markets that have been developed by companies like Stripe, for example, and trying to really build an infrastructure and an ecosystem in which these direct air capture companies have a stable source of income, essentially, from the federal government, and a kind of long-term stable market demand for the product that they're producing. So in kind of many ways, while this is obviously a technology-focused bill, this is a bill focused on ensuring that we have the kind of appropriate technologies to meet our climate goals. This is also a bill that really focuses substantially on human infrastructure. It focuses on creating jobs. It focuses on promoting American competitiveness, in part because this industry is projected to be a multi-$100 billion industry over the next 20 years. And ensuring that the United States has, or continues to be a leader and has the infrastructure to be a leader in this space long term is obviously going to be critically important to ensuring that, one, we meet our climate goals, but two, that we continue to remain, the United States continues to remain a leader in the larger kind of carbon capture, carbon removal space. So obviously this is something that my boss and Senator Whitehouse, I think two forward-thinking individuals in the climate space, strongly support, as well as I think a number of other climate-focused and climate-passionate senators also have an interest in. But really, our goal with kind of many of pieces of legislation like this is to garner widespread support kind of on both sides of the aisle. And I think that we're heartened by the fact that many of the investments made in carbon dioxide removal and direct air capture and carbon capture generally have been bipartisan. The infrastructure bill was passed with significant Republican support and with significant support for direct air capture. And I think that we see significant opportunities to make this issue and this bill one that has and garners bipartisan support. One bill that I'd also like to point to that I think that I imagine that individuals in the Maine delegation are living in Maine at the moment know well is the Crest Act, which was recently introduced by Senator Collins and Senator Cantwell, that really is designed to promote many of these carbon dioxide removal technologies, as well as fostering kind of a similar, but albeit much smaller procurement program for carbon dioxide removal. So here there's obviously the acknowledgement that in order for these companies to really to foster and be successful, we're going to need significant investments long-term in the overall kind of financing of these companies. So that's the kind of 20 or maybe 10-minute pitch on the importance of the bill and kind of the larger ecosystem and where we're going forward. I'm just going to put a quick pitch in here at the end to say that really this bill, I think, like many of the bills that are worked on in the climate space in Congress, is providing really low-hanging fruit, common sense solutions to, I think, many of the larger climate problems that we're facing right now. My boss is, I think a few of the bills that my boss has been really kind of interested in and passionate about kind of follow along this train of thought that there are practical solutions to climate change that garner broad bipartisan support. If you look at kind of the Infrastructure Act, one of the pieces that we're really interested and passionate about is the SCALE Act, which was basically designed to ensure that there's appropriate infrastructure and appropriate transportation storage infrastructure for carbon dioxide, to ensure that kind of the carbon dioxide removal technologies that we put in place have the ability to properly transport and store the carbon dioxide such that we provide them the infrastructure to be successful long term. I think that long term we see kind of bigger plays that have the possibility to garner broad bipartisan support, things that include things like a border carbon adjustment that will, on the one hand, provide kind of significant emissions reductions by essentially putting a price on carbon dioxide emitted for products that are produced, but on the other hand, enhance American competitiveness, in part because the US already does quite a good job in kind of the larger space of producing clean materials and producing things in kind of a green way or sustainable way. So all of this is really to say that I think that we remain dedicated in supporting technologies that are critical to achieving our climate goals. And I think that the Federal Carbon Dioxide Removal Leadership Act is kind of one of a larger ecosystem of climate bills that's really focused on promoting climate tech, promoting American innovation. I think that we really thoroughly appreciate all of the work that you all are doing to help kind of promote many of these solutions that we're talking about. And I think that for those of you in states with senators who are generally supportive of climate and are on the fence about bills to support, I think that certainly we feel strongly that this bill is kind of one of the crucial pieces to ensuring we hit many of our climate goals.
Great. Thank you so much. That was very powerful. I appreciate it. Does anyone have any questions for Brandon? Please go to your screen and hit a reaction button with a hand, raise hand. I see. Peter Garrett, I don't know if you meant to raise your hand or if you meant to comment on, was it clapping?
So if you could directly compare the Federal Carbon Dioxide Removal Leadership Act and its numbers with the Crest Act. I can't find a summary of the Crest Act online, and I haven't got enough details of what you were talking about. Would you please?
Yeah, I'm happy to dig a little bit deeper into that. So the Crest Act really is, I think, designed to be a more broad approach to carbon dioxide removal, in the sense that it has both an R&D section as well as a procurement section to it. So here, in a sense, it's trying to do, I would say, a broader suite of things. But overall, the piece I think that gives us a little bit of pause personally is that I think the overall amount of money dedicated to procurement in their bill is on the order of several $100 million. So I believe it's like $400 or $500 million over the course of 5 years or something. And just taking the kind of base estimates of our bill over the span of 10 years, we'd be investing in the order of $10 to $15 billion, I believe. I should have those numbers off the top of my head, but I don't quite remember. And I think the thing that gives us somewhat pause there is that in order to really hit the kind of 2050 goals that we have, much of these CDR technologies are going to have to scale very quickly. And ensuring that we are really investing in multi-million tons of procurement per year is going to be essential, because the DAC Hub funding is basically only dedicated towards facilities that are capturing in the order of a million tons per year. And I think that if we don't ensure that we have a market to support the kind of investments that we're making in DAC Hubs, then I think that long-term, we risk those being stranded investments, essentially. We risk investing in the infrastructure without properly investing in the market to support them long term. So I think that there obviously any bill that is bipartisan garners Republican support in the carbon dioxide removal space is one that gives us or encourages us as a Democratic office passionate about climate. But I think that we obviously would like to see those investments be an order of magnitude larger than I think they're projecting right now. I also believe that I think I know where a brief summary of the Crest Act is. I'll put it in the chat between questions, but just to make sure that you have it, Peter, in case you're interested in reading more about it.
Thank you. Yes, please.
I think we all want that. Thank you. That'd be amazing. I see we also have a question from Nancy. Could you unmute yourself?
Thank you. Thank you very much for an excellent presentation, Brandon. I'm a little curious to better understand the desire for us to be competitive in a market, but it's yet unclear what the market will in fact amount to. I get the need for the government to start it, to prime the pump, but where do you see an actual market for procurement of something that we're procuring merely to make it go away? To look, what would that look like over the larger time, so that us being competitive in that market is actually a benefit rather than us being just a service to the world. I don't mind us being a service to the world, but that's a totally different kind of argument than what you're putting out. So if you could kind of visualize that long-term market, I'd appreciate it.
That's an excellent question. And I think one that is perhaps one of the existential questions of the larger space. I think that what we see the the role of the federal government right now in making the investment in the market is really to drive the price down on the overall cost per ton of carbon dioxide removal. So at the moment, I think most DAC facilities our cost for removal is on the order of $500 per ton. And I think that if you ask any private company, they'll admit that's way outside of the bounds of anything they're willing to pay for carbon dioxide removal services. And that's understandable. It's very expensive. And I think that what we see our role is to bring that cost down to closer on the order of $150, $100 per ton, where we're starting to get into the ballpark of some of the tax credits that are there for carbon dioxide removal, such as 45Q, for those who are clean energy tax nerds out there. But what we, I think, long-term see the role of the private sector is that ideally we would love for there to be some form of incentive, essentially, for companies to procure carbon dioxide removal services, whether this be through something like a carbon price, whether this be through something like a border carbon adjustment, whether that be through something like a cap and trade model. I think that really trying to incentivize companies to see carbon dioxide removal as an essential piece, or to see their kind of emissions profile as an essential piece of kind of the larger larger impact that they have on the market, is something that is, I think, the big unanswered question that we have right now, but I think certainly something that will be essential to ensuring that we have a market for clean energy tech like this. So I realize that was kind of an unsatisfactory answer to your question, Nancy, in part because I think many of the kind of market infrastructure that we need long-term for these types of technologies is not established yet. And I think that we're really trying to serve the role of making it so that the barrier is 2 feet tall as opposed to 20 feet tall to get over. And I think that we see this bill as really kind of a first step in that direction, I would say.
If I could do a quick follow-up question.
Sure.
Actually, we're really short on time and we have 3 other hands up. I actually have only 1 minute that's allotted for this. So can I switch to Ron Swenson first? Thank you.
Okay,
I'm
sure.
happy to answer questions in the chat, by the way, in case anyone wants to put them there.
Yeah, thank you very much. Lily Tomlin said, no matter how cynical you become, it's never enough to keep up. So with that in mind, I am aware that in order to spend billions of dollars, you must lean upon the incumbency, because the incumbency has the tools to make things happen, whether it's drilling things or, moving things around. And so I gather that the Republican support derives in part from the opportunity for a lot of this direct air capture money to go to the oil companies and their ilk. And so I'm just curious, from your vantage point, to what extent are the more highly leverageable technologies that are in process and still in the innovation space rather than in the production space, that is to say the incumbency, how can we imagine that those who are doing these kinds of more advanced technologies to get carbon not only out of the atmosphere but out of the ocean, which, and it happens that I'm doing meetings with such people an hour from now. So I'm curious about this dichotomy between the innovators who are, breaking down the lines of support, and those who already have the direct access to money through government contracts and established balance sheets and capability of doing things.
Yeah, you really touch on kind of a very difficult piece of the larger carbon dioxide removal space. And I think the one that I personally have some reservations about, in part because obviously many of these technologies are going to be leveraged and utilized by major oil companies long term, in part because they have the investments, they have the technology, they have the infrastructure to capture and store long-term carbon dioxide. And obviously, I think that perhaps with this audience, there's an understanding that the oil industry has not always been the best actor in the larger energy space. And I think that there's clearly an understanding that we don't want this money to essentially be a handout long-term to ensure that fossil fuel companies retain kind of the power and influence that they have long-term. So we obviously I understandably sit at kind of an uncomfortable spot between wanting to support these technologies, these companies, these spaces that have the kind of appropriate infrastructure in place to ensure that these technologies can be successful, while also wanting to ensure that we don't lock in, I think, many of these methods of producing energy, such as the utilization of fossil fuels for the next 100 years. I don't have a good answer to this question, in part because I think that this is still something that is like widely being discussed in the larger picture. I think that one thing that I often point to is that the Department of Energy, for example, in selecting who gets direct air capture funding is, I think, trying very hard not to give basically 4 projects to fossil fuel companies. But it's difficult because I think much of the storage infrastructure for carbon dioxide is going to necessitate, is really going to necessitate the kind of knowledge and kind of physical infrastructure that the fossil fuel industry has at the moment. So I realize that's an unsatisfactory answer to that question, but I think that it is something that we are all actively thinking about, and I think one that I think requires some perhaps mental gymnastics at some times.
I appreciate your answers, and I appreciate the questions that have been asked. I'm sorry that we've run out of time for this. I was supposed to stop at 10:31, but this was too fascinating to cut into, obviously. And I appreciate the idea that it's a difficult spot to be standing in, because that's our organization's take, is that there are no enemies on this path. So we believe in reaching out and holding hands with everybody we can going forward. And that is still difficult. I understand exactly what you're saying. And I appreciate the way you phrased it. So thank you, Brandon McMurtry. I'm sorry we don't have any more time for questions, but as Brandon pointed out, you can put your question in the chat and he'll try and get to you on that. We are so delighted to have had you as a guest speaker. We know you're really, really busy, but feel free to stay on for a little more of the call if you can. And on behalf of the Foundation for Climate Restoration, I'm so grateful for your inspiring work and your dedication to finding solutions to climate change. We extend our deepest gratitude.
Thank you so much for having me. And I see there are already some questions in the chat, and I'll make sure to get to all of you in due time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure talking with you all.
We really appreciate it. Wasn't that great, everybody? It was really exciting to have Brandon with us. I appreciated it. Yes, love it. Now I have to switch to announcements. Now, before I go into those, though, I'd like to point out that we are trying to get Brandon to answer more questions next Wednesday at our Wednesday chapter leaders meeting, which is usually 4 o'clock on Wednesdays Pacific time or 7 o'clock Eastern time. And the only reason it's in question, of course, is he's involved with the negotiating staff on the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. So he might not be available to speak for us, but I wanted to make it clear that we did try, and he might still be able to attend Wednesday's session and answer more questions at that point. Since our chapters were started in the new offering in October, we've had 14 letters to the editor published and 35 meetings with elected officials. I suspect that those figures are actually low. So if your figure isn't listed on our chapter involvement statistics page, please get back to me so we can update our records. Please report your meetings with elected officials, your published media, and your outreach events to me and by going to the website reporting portal. The link for reporting on our website is in the chat. Thank you for using that. Each month, our chapter member will share a grassroots victory. This month, I'm delighted to have asked Carol England of the North Bay chapter to share her experiences with setting up a book signing event in Petaluma for Peter Fiekowsky and his book, Climate Restoration, The Only Future That Will Sustain the Human Race. Buckminster Fuller says, you can never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a model that makes the old one obsolete. That's in Peter Fiekowsky's book. This last quote in his book describes what Carol England and the North Bay are constantly doing with their efforts. They always work to create the best model of the future they can visualize and make it happen now to cause the old one to be obsolete. So I'm going to read Carol's story since she couldn't be here today. The book signing event for Peter Fakowski was my very first such event, she says. I had no concerns about the book signing. I would make sure it happened. His book, titled Climate Restoration, The Only Future That Will Sustain the Human Race. The first step I took was to see if Peter would want to do a book signing. He said that it would be fun. So I scheduled it with Copperfield's Books in Petaluma. I sent emails, took trips to the bookstore, and made calls to speak with the manager, Amber, and Jamie, the person responsible for scheduling. Many, many calls and emails and trips to the store were needed to get that date set up. I knew what I needed to do to make the event happen, thus the many trips and follow-up emails and calls. I also needed materials for the website for the bookstore. I traded many phone calls and emails to the publicist and the publisher. I also contacted the authors, Peter Fiekowsky and Carol Douglas, for the necessary promotion materials for the website. I have to cut in at this point and tell you that I have a document that had that information, and I have it available for anybody who's thinking about doing the same. It's already here and ready for you. It's actually on our publicly accessible part of the website. You don't even need a password to get in. Some of the challenges were the long time between the email responses from the bookstore staff, Carol tells us. I had to make phone calls and send emails to get responses with information I needed to further the plans. Then my husband, Jeff, and I were diagnosed with COVID and could not follow through with the last details since we had to quarantine for 10 days. At the last minute, we learned about needing to set up live streaming. So we called John Bowie, a professional videographer, and he swooped in and set up the event's video filming. I continued to invite and post the event online. It took patience, perseverance, collaboration, community. And when the big breakdowns came along, I reminded myself that this is what it takes to restore the climate. In the beginning, the breakdown that required additional patience and perseverance was the long delays in hearing from Copperfield staffs. Sometimes I had to resend the same email and then go to the store to see what was up. Luckily, I lived nearby and could easily stop by. I did that so many times that the staff got to know me by name and they knew I was there to see the manager. Along the way, I would remind myself, the game is to restore the climate and this is what it takes. Once Jeff and I tested positive for COVID, we turned the entire event over to Philip Paskal, the chair of the North Bay chapter. for the last few days while they got over COVID. Philip and his team did the rest of the inviting, coordinating, and communicating and confirming all those attendees. So I'm going to switch back to being me instead of Carol. Arranging this book signing event was very helpful in promoting Peter's book and getting the word of restoring the climate out to the world. I'm so grateful to what the North Bay chapter did and the North Bay chapter team's leadership on this effort.
Can I speak?
Thank you.
Terry?
Actually, we don't have any time. We still have a training and we have less than 20 minutes for that. So each month we'll have a brief training or teach a new laser talk, or we'll role play a call to an elected official or the other community leader. The August action sheet is in the chat. Hearing Brandon speak with us on this month's conference call was truly inspiring, and he helped us understand the Federal Carbon Dioxide Removal Leadership Act in the Senate, S4280. As of Friday, August 5th, we still only had the 2 original sponsors of the bill, and that's why your letter to your members of the House and Senate and the letters written by your guests are so important. We have some new people on today's call who may have never written an elected official before. So I would like to hear from someone who wrote their first letter after joining a Foundation for Climate Restoration chapter. Is there someone who could come off of mute, just give your name and city and tell us about the first time you wrote a letter? Was it hard? Was it easy? Was it exciting or nerve-wracking? Do I have a volunteer? Well, since we're short on time, I'm just going to keep going then. I know that if you're listening on recording, you're going, what? Here's what's going to happen in this section. I'm going to ask people to raise their hand and read the Take Action section at the bottom of the action sheet. Then we will hear how someone might start their letter to their elected official. Finally, we will take a few questions, then close the call and urge you to go into the breakout rooms with your chapter or one of the other chapters if you don't have a chapter meeting immediately after this call to write your letters. I would like someone to read the Take Action section and points 1 through 3. Please raise your hand if you'll read for us, beginning with Take Action. Don't see any hands. Anybody want to just read the first 3 on the Take Action sheet?
I don't see the Take Action sheet, Terry.
Oh, it should be in the chat.
Oh.
Yeah. There's a link in the chat.
It's a little buried by the questions and answers going on.
That's wonderful. There's an exciting conversation going on. I'm appreciating that in itself.
I can repost it in there. It did get moved up a bit.
There we go. I can tell you that the first one is to find your U.S. federal representative by clicking here. There's an actual link right at the top of the sheet. If you click on the link, it takes you to the representative. If you're listening to this recording, which we have a lot of people who listen after we're done, the action sheet will be easy to see if you'll get this recording. Usually I'll have the action sheet in all the recordings that I send out. But clicking on it is a simple matter. You put in your address and your zip code, and the same for your U.S. senators. There's another link on the action sheet. So that's basically 1 and 2, and I've read them to you. And then the third one is to locate the online form for hearing from constituents. So the one thing you want to be able to do is communicate with your federal representative or your senator to let them know that you are supporting FCDRLA, or the Federal Carbon Dioxide Removal Leadership Act, or S4280 in the Senate, and HR 7434 in the House. Now, before we move on, let's take a moment and see a show of hands if anybody was able to click on your representative and see the form yourself. Anybody on the call see it?
The links are also in the chat.
Oh, great. Okay, well, she put all that in the chat, and I promise I will put that in the note that goes out with the recording, so you'll be able to see it later. Going back to the action sheet, after you figured out how to do your communication, you will be deciding how to introduce yourself. So provide personal information to root yourself in the community. Like, I have lived in this community for 22 years, and I'm a teacher in the Federal Way School District, or however you want to phrase it. It's nice for them to know, for your official to hear, that you're someone who belongs to a community or a neighborhood that they recognize, and for you to describe what component you are inside that community. So that's an important way to anchor the letter. And then briefly share why climate restoration matters to you. Why do you care? In each of these letters, this is number 5, in each of your letters, find something for which to thank the representative and both senators. If you cannot find anything related to climate change, it can be on any issue you care about that he or she has acted on. You can also thank them for their public service. 6, make the ask. Ask each U.S. Senator to co-sponsor or thank them for co-sponsoring the Senate version of S4280 or FCDRLA as a key step toward restoring the climate. You can find a list of Senate co-sponsors right there. There's a link on the action sheet for August. Each Senate liaison in your chapter will ask your senators to meet up with your group. The reason why we have liaisons is so we don't have too many people calling from the same exact group asking for the same thing. Ask your representative to co-sponsor or thank them for co-sponsoring if you're talking about HR 7434 or FCDRLA in the House as a key step toward restoring the climate. Number 7, provide some background to support your argument. In your own words, share why it is important for Congress to pass FCDRLA. Visit the body of the action sheet to support your request. You can go anywhere in that action sheet and pick out a sentence or two that has meaning to you to give some reason and support for your argument on behalf of it. And then at the end of your letter, say thank you and repeat the ask and request a response. Leave your name, address, phone number, and email address so they can respond to you. And thank you. Just for a moment, let me read number 4 and ask someone to brainstorm how they might go about answering that part of it, going back to introducing yourself. Can anyone say how they might start their letter? I see Peter Garrett has his hand up.
Yeah, I'm a grandfather. It doesn't sound it, but I've lived here in central Maine for 42 years, and I grow a garden. And what I've noticed is that the temperatures keep going up. The growing season gets longer. There's less frost in the ground in the winter, so we get ticks. No more lying in the hayfield, thank you very much. We need to do something about climate for my grandchildren, so that they maybe someday can lay around in the hayfield, like my wife tells me was possible when she was a girl.
That's profound, because right there, I think you've already created an amazing letter. And I'm sure if Brandon is still listening, he's going, yeah, they would listen to that letter. That would be a letter that would be meaningful to them in their office. And that's what really matters, is making an impact. So I appreciate the way you threw that together so quickly, Peter. Thank you. Peter's the one who's having the garden party I mentioned earlier. I tell you, I'm so excited about it. I can't wait to see pictures when they come back. Thank you, Peter. So that gives you an idea of what kind of a letter you'd want to start. Does anyone else have any ideas of what kind of letter they would write? I have to agree with Peter. For me, it comes down to being a grandparent. I really like the idea of a future for my grandkids, who by 2050 will be 32. I mean, this is an important time if we can start working forward on building up a solution. I want an arsenal of solutions, to be quite honest, for my own sake. But overall, that's really crucial. Does anybody else have any comments they'd like to make?
Sorry,
Well,
I have my hand up.
Cynthia has her hand up.
Oh, you know what? It's not showing up on mine. Sorry.
Well,
Go ahead, Cynthia.
I just want to tell you that I have made a couple of requests to my different representatives, and you really have to be tenacious. It's you need to constantly, sometimes I've had to send the request 3 times because they lose it. They're so busy, and just be patient. Don't take it personally. And it took us 5 months to finally get our second meeting with Mark Levine's staffer. So we're finally getting that done on Tuesday. So that was, but I'm telling you, it was the recalling and re-emailing, and it does take some work, but just be patient. That's all.
Great. Actually, that's wonderful. And when it comes to Cynthia's hard work, she's actually been instrumental in really pushing for a lot of those meetings all by herself in some ways. It's fascinating how much she's had to throw us together on the same email chain to get things going. And I'm sure that we all appreciate that work. The idea too is that with one of her meetings she's set up, we're actually going to be meeting with other staffers and explaining how important this work is. And that's not something that can be ignored. Having a presentation to discuss this is important. And I see Maria has a guest on the call. Tom, did you start to say something? I thought I heard.
Oh, hi. Hello.
I just wanted
Adorable.
to say that I've been a little bit preoccupied. Brandon and I have been having a conversation on the side, but anyway, in my experience with anybody here with a citizens climate lobby? Anyway, yeah. So I learned from visits to the Capitol that volume is important. So we always used to give sacks of a few hundred letters to usually a staffer, and so it is hard to make contact with the actual member of Congress. It's very difficult. Usually just talk to staffers, which is frustrating. But anyway, I just want to encourage everybody, if you just use a form letter. Do you have form letters, Terry? I'm sorry, I didn't look at any of your links.
We really like for people to really think from their own mind as clearly as possible. We give them an action sheet that kind of has much of the information on it so that they're not walking in without anything to write with. But it's extremely powerful to write your thoughts out and explain why you're asking for it. It's a little less transactional. It's transactional to just have to sign it and then, okay, we're done, and not worry about it until 3 months later. I've seen it transform people to have to sit there and think about the letter. We have Sam Daly Harris on the call, who is an amazing person at explaining how important that particular perspective is. Did you want to throw in a sentence or two, Sam?
Well, I would say if I'm tabling at the farmer's market and 50 people are coming over, I might do something simpler for the 50 than I might do on this call and for newbies coming to my chapter meeting. Either works, but yeah, we really want people to have the deeper experience when we can.
I love the way you said that. And I think that as someone who's been a staffer, the stuff we paid attention to was the stuff that was written out. If it's the same form letter with the same sentence and a half, I can guarantee you we do not bother reading any part of that, except we do acknowledge the name and send back a form letter. But if you go through and you actually write us a letter, as Dave Cortese once told us, I read those. I actually read those. And I am still moved by them every day. So granted, form letters are part of life, especially with such a huge volume of emails that we all have to put out. But I agree with you. There is also great value if we write the letter. If we put the pieces together ourselves, it has a huge impact on both sides, to the receiver and to the writer. So thank you for bringing that up, Tom. I appreciate it. Well, I am deeply moved by each of you on this call, and it's been profound to see us all interested in restoring the climate. That's really an important part of everything. One of the things that really sticks with me from this call is the amazing job that was done by the North Bay chapter. In spite of a COVID diagnosis, they still pulled together the best event. It included, I think we actually have a minute now if you want to squeeze it in, Philip, how many books were sold and how important it was.
Yeah, I got to pull it up now. What I was going to say. It's about a minute.
There's 3 minutes left.
Yeah, it's a minute and 15 seconds, so hang on.
Over and over again, that team pulled together and supported one another to have it all come together as a success.
Okay. So I just was going to say, after you read Carol's letter, that it should be clear that Carol did a huge amount of work to create the book signing. However, it came out of who she was being and her stand for, this shall happen. When she handed it over to me to make it happen, I took on her stand and also her way of being. I emailed around 400 people about the event, including creating an Evite, first time ever, to invite another 175 people. And some of the chapter members also invited lots of people. Diane Warren, who also helped in many ways, Sally Wells, Cynthia Canavy, Jim Hansen, Carol and Jeff England, Herman Gear, and Adrian Paskal. They all were inviting. The result was 32 confirmed guests said they were coming, and it took a team, obviously, to have a successful event. We had 36 people show up. The questions were engaging when Peter ended his presentation. And the manager of Copperfield's Books was very happy and sold out of Peter's book that evening. So bottom line, anyone can create a book signing. I recommend they create a strong stand, and it also helps to have a team supporting it happening.
Great, thank you. Over and over again, they all pulled together and supported one another to have it become a great success. I hope you can all join us again on our next monthly conference call, which will be the second Saturday of the month because Labor Day is falling on the first weekend. Our next Saturday is Saturday, September 10th at 1 o'clock Eastern, 10 o'clock Pacific. We are urging everyone today to write a letter immediately after this conference call so we can have more people writing their members of Congress and senators urging co-sponsorship of FCDRLA. The more voices they hear from, the better it will be as far as their teams are concerned. They'll hear you. Also remember to have your chapter's liaison call the elected officials, science, and environmental staff member and make them aware of these bills in detail. For those who've requested it, we'll put you in your breakout rooms in a moment. So please stay on if that's your chapter. Now we'll ask everyone to unmute yourselves and say goodbye.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.